Eleanor Roosevelt and Frances Perkins were active members of WCC and were also very influential in the city, the state, and federal politics. Both were leading voices for social and economic equality in the early to the mid-20th century. Today, we're still building on their work and examining current public policy around social security, economic equality, workplace health, and safety. Some of it is unfortunately not as good as we would like it, and some of the issues that are creating are with the issues that these women worked so hard to reverse. So it's our responsibility to listen and to learn and to act and to preserve the important work that's been done and do more work on top of that and move it forward. It's going to be tough in the next years, but I think it's doable if we show that everybody's shoulder is to the wheel. We have a lot of people to thank for being able to have this discussion today. And special thanks to Roosevelt House for allowing us to be here and working in partnership with both the Frances Perkins Center and the Women's City Club of New York. And I'd like to in particular thank Michael Cheney. Michael, would you stand up for, I'm going to just call a few names, and if you'll stand up, we'll recognize you all at one time. Michael Cheney, who is the executive director of the Frances Perkins Center. Elizabeth Lubetkin-Lipton, where are you, Elizabeth? Who is our Women's City Club Vice President for Development. Mary Murphy, a member of the Women's City Club Board, over here. And Padma Simangal. Padma, where are you? Our program manager at Women's City Club. Thank you, all of you, for all of your work that made today happen. Now, last but certainly not least, it's a privilege to introduce Harold Holzer, the Jonathan F. Fanton Director of the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter College in New York City. I knew, get that right. Harold has been instrumental in getting us this wonderful venue and our keynote speaker, William Van de Heuvel. So thank you very, very much, Harold. And thank you to all of you for the great work that has been done. And now it's my privilege to turn this over to Harold, who will introduce our keynote.
Thank you, Annette, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to have you back to the second annual Perkins Roosevelt Symposium here at Roosevelt House. I hope we continue to build on this tradition and explore the issues that Frances Perkins cared about and that have such enormous relevance today in this house, in this city and country. So much has happened since we inaugurated this event last year. It's almost as if we have a different city and a different country and a different world. All of our assumptions challenged, some hopes dashed, and just a different world. And when Annette says, taking the long view, we'll get back to where we need to be, it's heartening that there are so many people devoted to that principle as Frances Perkins was. So I can't welcome without always making note of Frances Perkins' great moment at this place. This is the building where Frances was interviewed for her cabinet position, and 4 floors up, I guess, technically, in the second floor library that you're welcome to go look at if you haven't seen it during the breaks or any time after the event. Modest little room where FDR installed himself, and the Trump Tower of 1932-33. I get different reactions. I was stared at with icy silence on Friday when I used that line, but I knew I could revive it with this group. So she wanders in, and knowing she's going to get the call, an historic call to be the first woman in the cabinet, and she has some issues that might have compelled a lesser person to stay in New York and decline the honor. So she decided to come armed with a demand of her own. And when FDR said, "Frances, I want to make you the first woman in the cabinet," and she said, "Only if you do old age pensions," in Washington as we began to do in Albany. And FDR, who arguably never said no to anyone, said, of course. And she said, well, while we're at it, what about child labor laws and minimum wage? And not only Social Security was born in this house, but also the first threads of the social safety net were woven here. And if it wasn't for Frances Perkins' courage in making some demands that morning, it might have been slower in coming or might not have happened at all. So it always gives us great inspiration to know of that exciting moment. When I first took this job, the first book that Bill, our speaker, asked me to read was Frances Perkins' Reminiscences, and he said, and don't forget page. I mean, he was worried that I wouldn't read the whole book, which I did, but he told me the page. I see a few people have the book with them today, so it was miraculous. That is a perfect lead into my real role today, which is seizing the honor to introduce our keynote speaker. There aren't too many people in this room or in the country who can lay claim not only to leadership in his own right, but also the privilege of having met Eleanor Roosevelt and Frances Perkins in his day. Our speaker spoke here a couple of weeks ago, and he also lays claim to knowing two hugely important characters from World War I. Now, he met them when he was a mere child, but he gave one of the most remarkable lectures I've ever had the privilege of hosting or attending here for the centennial of World War I and to mark the opening of our exhibition on the Roosevelt family in World War I, which I hope you will look at during the breaks, or maybe you've seen it already this morning. But Bill spoke about the most decorated soldier or officer of World War I, Wild Bill Donovan, and the most courageous dissident of World War I, Roger Baldwin, both of whom he knew, and whose interconnected story was just an amazing bit of history and reminiscence, the likes of which only he can give. As you probably know, he's a distinguished attorney, a diplomat who served as Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations in the Carter administration, a political reformer who helped reshape the primary laws in this state and in this country, a member of the Robert Kennedy team that helped make Brown v. Board of Education something more than a decision, but a reality in practice. A champion of prison reform in New York long before that became a fashionable progressive issue. And probably, crucially for us, the best friend that the Roosevelt family has in New York. He's been the go-to person on all things Roosevelt ever since the dedication of Roosevelt Island as Roosevelt Island 45 years ago, which I was at. My wife wrote Mayor Lindsay's speech that day, so I got to go along on the boat, which was nice. And he can do it all, whether he is creating a park and a statue, beautiful statue, and a wonderful place to remember Roosevelt on Roosevelt Island, or leading a sing-along of Happy Days Are Here Again at Hyde Park, or serving with distinction as he does as a member of the Roosevelt House Advisory Board at Roosevelt's real home here at 65th Street. Not to be too competitive with Hyde Park, but I'm happy to be able, for the second time in a fortnight, to introduce the inimitable Ambassador William Vanden Heuvel.
Thank you, Harold. Harold, as you know, has been a major force in the cultural life of our city, having for 25 years played a significant role at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The moment he left, they had problems. But we gained something masterful here at Roosevelt House, because Harold has brought a whole new dimension of activity and programs here. So I'm speaking today with great honor, primarily because Chris Bryce has asked me to do this. Chris and I share a college, and he was later than I, of course, which he's quick to tell people. But he had the great advantage of, while being at Cornell and Telluride House, of knowing Madam Perkins, as she's referred to in the New Deal era, as a person of inestimable achievement. So in large part, I have always thought that the revival of Madam Perkins as a living force in progressive politics is due to groups like this. I salute the City Club on their 102nd anniversary, and I'm hoping to be around to give the keynote for the next major anniversary, whatever it is. But we're in hard times. In Progress or Peril is the name of the symposium today, and I'm just going to comment on a couple aspects of it. Very few people have ever lived through an election like the last one, where you had almost a certainty of victory, snatched away from you and taken and abused so quickly, and turning the country around so dramatically. I have seen that kind of an election before, and was on the other side of it. In 1948, I was head of the Young Democrats at Cornell, and I was invited to a Republican victory party for Thomas E. Dewey, and everybody was prepared to celebrate it. And there were so few Democrats in upstate New York, you could count them on one hand practically. There were so few, as a matter of fact, that because of my position, leader of the Young Democrats with maybe 14 members, I was invited to share the day with Harry Truman, campaigning in upstate New York. He was on a train going back around and forth. I always remembered being at the prison with him in Auburn, New York. And in those days, there was a Russian composer, Khachaturian, who was very famous with the music that he had just written. And John Tabor was the Republican head of the Ways and Means Committee in the House. And so Truman chose to speak on the saber dance, the Tabor dance, taking off on Khachaturian. And as he came out on the back of the train, there were 20,000 people at least standing there. It was a crowd that upstate New York had rarely, if ever, seen. And then suddenly the cloudburst came. Not a person moved. I mean, in upstate New York, we're used to bad weather, but this was weather that was colossal. And as we got back into the train afterward, he said, well, God may be with the Republicans, but the people are with me. And I never forgot that on election night, going over to the Republican victory party for Thomas E. Dewey and watching this balloon just go zip, as suddenly Harry Truman triumphed against all odds because he stood for something. If you heard Harry Truman speak in those days so directly to people, so clearly to people about what the Democratic Party was going to do, you'd understand why he did, in fact, win. Well, excuse me. We're celebrating Frances Perkins, and someone said, this book is worth reading. I read it years and years ago, but I read it again in preparation for this day. And it's a superb book. The Roosevelt I knew. It's so simple and direct and straightforward and honest. So honest. I mean, I've sat for years with the people who claim that everything that happened in the New Deal was the responsibility and the credit of everybody except Franklin Roosevelt. Somebody's given a memorandum to him, telling him, do this, and of course he did it as though he had never thought or talked about it before. But he had a special relationship with Frances Perkins. And the fact of her history in New York State politics and in New York State government, she was an Al Smith woman. And Al Smith was a great governor. And Al Smith was the one who insisted that Franklin Roosevelt run in 1928 when he was elected governor and Al Smith lost the election for president. But Franklin Roosevelt saw in her something that made her very special and very different. Smith once said to Roosevelt that the difference is that the Democrats, he said, of my generation will accept advice from women, but they won't accept orders from women. Roosevelt said, I'm prepared to do both. And he did both by bringing Frances Perkins as State Industrial Commissioner, and then the first woman member of a cabinet in the history of the United States, and the longest serving member of the cabinet. So when I look at that picture of Franklin Roosevelt and Frances Perkins, then I so recommend that you read this book again. I think you'll get a great deal of pleasure out of it. Labor workforce was one of the major forces that brought Franklin Roosevelt together with Frances Perkins. The moment he died, the Republicans determined that they were going to take away the benefits that had been given to labor in that crucial New Deal period. I saw the Taft-Hartley bill, for example, was passed in 1947 when the Republicans had gained control of the Congress. The first thing they did was to attack labor and to take away its protections and its rights. And it's been the total history of the Republican Party since those days in 1947. But I witnessed this past election something that disturbed me greatly. I think it was in April of 16 that I read this story, how in Orlando, Florida, the Disney company had fired 400 American workers and replaced them with a labor force that had been brought in from India. Not only did they replace them, they forced the American workers to stay on the job until they could train the Indians to do the job. And secondly, they made them all sign a legal agreement that they would not talk about what had happened to the public. Well, the story got out, and I thought it was an extraordinary thing that we would allow that to happen. And I tried to reach the Hillary people, and I did finally reach the Department of Labor people. And it was all done under a visa program where companies could bring in people that they couldn't hire in the United States with the same qualifications. That wasn't what this was about. These were a group of people brought, I'm not critical of immigrants in any way, but these were brought in specifically to replace Americans who were working in a job so that they could reduce the salaries and wages that were being paid. And it was over 400 people. And what really disturbed me is when I saw Trump down in Orlando, Florida, meeting with some of those workers and taking to heart what they were saying. And when I talked to the Labor Department, they said, yes, but it's legal what has happened. I said, I don't care if it's legal. It's wrong. Does anybody know what it is to have a job and to lose it that way? To have a family depending upon you and then have that suddenly taken away? To have worked for a company for 10 or 12 years and then have them come in an arbitrary fashion and say, you're gone? I think that was a wake-up call for me, that something was happening, that the Democrats had lost touch with what really means to the working classes of America. We all know that the working class in America is going to be changed dramatically in the years ahead. The new technologies have changed the kind of criteria that are necessary to hire people and the tasks that they will do. We're going to need the greatest skill, political and otherwise, to really understand that we have to represent working America. And I think part of that, frankly, is bringing back corporate America into a relationship with the Democratic Party so that they understand that their responsibility is not alone to the shareholders, which is a new myth that has brought the last 30 years, that the whole effort of a corporate America is to produce maximum profits for the shareholders with no other considerations. That's not so. That's not what corporate America should be. Corporate America is the largest developer of jobs in our country. We have to bring them in. You can't keep blaming the government for the loss of jobs when in fact the control of development of jobs are in the hands of the private sector to a large degree. But there are forces at last speaking in the country today to remind corporate America that it should have three responsibilities. One is to represent capital. One is to represent labor. And the third is to take into charge community concerns. Labor has met defeat after defeat in terms of unionization in America. I remember being in San Francisco in the 80s and reading the story how the Bank of America was letting an enormous part of its staff go because they were going to bring them in part-time, reorganizing their schedule. What did that mean? It meant they no longer had to pay health benefits and no longer had to pay Social Security benefits. I said to Lane Kirkland when I called him originally from California, every labor leader, every supporter of Union America should be walking in this city today to say, you can't do that to working people. So the first thing I would say is that we have to have the imagination, the creativity, and the understanding to bring corporate America in as our ally. We have to work to produce a voice for labor where it is heard and where it is meaningful. It does not have that voice today. I don't know what the percentages are, but I think it's only 7 or 8% of the private sector that's unionized. We have to, it's not a matter of, I'm not even suggesting that the answer is more and more unions, because I don't know that. You're much more expert in that, and I intend to hear some of the answers here today myself. But it's one of the most important challenges we have is to bring working class Americans back into the Democratic Party, not as a matter of old-time loyalty, but because we have the energy and the creativity to see to it that we understand the new age of America in terms of working America. Immigration and refugees. I've spent a lifetime working with refugees in the International Rescue Committee. Nobody's more sympathetic than people like those who run agencies like the IRC. But we have to understand that immigration in a sovereign country is something that is defined and expanded or curtailed by the Congress working with the president. Something's happened where you could have 11 million undocumented workers in America. That's not wrong for the government of the United States to say we have to do something about that. We may need those 11 million, and they should be brought in under a legal process. But it can't be left to that. I remember going to see the president of Mexico for Jimmy Carter at one point, and we were talking, in those days there was immigration problems too. And he said, let me tell you, Mr. Ambassador, if you didn't need them, they wouldn't be there. And that's of course true. The reason why we have this extraordinary immigrant population in America, especially the Hispanic population, is because we need them. And they've done a wonderful thing for America. They've brought new energy, they've created jobs. We honored in the Four Freedoms Park last year a Mexican who had come across, swimming across the Rio Grande, who was today the greatest brain surgeon in the country and head of the Mayo Clinic in Florida. I mean, we could point to the left and right probably in this room and find all kinds of stories of immigrants. My own parents, I feel so strongly about in that same way, who made America great. We can't let Donald Trump have that slogan, making America great. He doesn't even understand America. He wouldn't know what great means in the context of the last 70 years. I haven't heard him once yet mention the name of Franklin Roosevelt. So I say that in the context of immigration and refugees especially is a different problem. We have to reach out to those who are oppressed in the world so they have hope. They've got to have some idea that something like America exists instead of our just sitting there watching a vast, great immigration really undermine the democratic institutions of Western Europe. So that if we don't get hold of this immigration problem, we're doing much more than hurting the people who are directly affected. What we're doing is really threatening democratic rule because the anti-democrats, the know-nothings, historically have used immigration as the issue by which they rallied a country to fight back against what it represents. Well, the title of this program today is Progress or Peril. I hesitate to read the papers every day because of the peril. I mean, how many people do we know who've stopped watching television? And when they issued new blood pressure limits today in the government, I thought to myself, these guys are watching the score properly. But I want to just mention a couple of the issues that before this tax bill is paid, I want someone to say, I want to see Trump's tax returns. This tax bill, I can assure you, is being tailored for the Trumps like him, who have already taken advantage of every possible means to deny the country sharing the resources that they have used to build themselves as tax-free billionaires. I have no doubt becoming a billionaire is a tough challenge, but I have no doubt either that it's a lot easier if you don't have to pay taxes. And that's what's happened in our country. And we're in the process of watching, by the narrowest of votes, the taking away of a hard-earned right to medical care and treatment, diminishing that, destroying the Medicaid program, so that a group of people who are the most mightily privileged people in the world, who already have extraordinary resources, are going to have $1.5 trillion more. That's an insult to American history. That's wrong. Beginning with Theodore Roosevelt, who was a strong advocate of the income tax and the estate taxes. And throughout the Roosevelt administration, it was readjusted. Our tax system was readjusted. So people had the benefits of America, but had to pay for part of it, reflecting their own success. What did Franklin Roosevelt say in his second inaugural? Don't judge me by how much I help those who have much. Rather, judge me by how much I have helped those who have need. And that should still be the clarion call of Americans and Democrats. We're approaching a time, it seems to me, where we have to stand up to the Republicans and say something different than we've said in years past. You have a relationship, a constitutional obligation, not to dishonor this country, not to allow the corruption that is already visible, but to stand up and say, America first, in a way that has real meaning. America first in the context of its values. America first in the context of the four freedoms. But to say America first and have the President of the United States cavorting with the dictators of the world in a happy stroll, and then to accept that, that's painful. It's painful. I would speak just for a moment, if I may, about foreign policy. And I say this because I think each and every one of us is going to have a responsibility in the immediate years ahead to do everything we possibly can, because we are in peril. When I see what they've done to the State Department, decimated it, when I hear a fellow who was being considered for ambassador came to see me and told me about how he was being vetted and was essentially told that one of the objectives was to destroy the Foreign Service because it was a liberal sanctuary in our government. I say the alarm bells have to start ringing. We are watching a great, putting a world together is a very tough game. Franklin Roosevelt knew it better than anybody. And yet we had out of that something that was hopeful. We knew each obstacle had to be taken over, had to be faced. But Roosevelt's dream of the United Nations was a means by which the world acting together was finally going to do something about the possibilities of stopping war. We are engaged today in an endless cycle of war. There is no greater threat to democracy than that simple fact, because war strains the freedoms that we have. It takes the resources that we need, and it can't be won. Wars cannot be won anymore. That day is over if it ever was. So what we need is Americans to stand up and say, let's review what we're doing in this world, but let's review it from the point of view of America's mission being to prevent war, not to cause it. We're sitting today with a government that's composed of billionaires and generals. That's a very dangerous combination. I give salutes to the integrity of all of the military people who serve our country. But I read what they write, and they write differently about the world that we would like to create than Franklin Roosevelt would write about it, for example. They have a different value structure, and their post and their responsibility should be clearly delineated, but it should be understood that they are in the service of the nation and that we will not allow the military to have such an over and controlling role. Today, most people are very grateful that they're there because of what else would be there if they weren't. But that's a very dangerous situation to undertake. So we are in a time of challenge, obviously. And I think that organizations like the Women's City Club, Roosevelt House in its own way, so many different groups, what you're doing in Maine in terms of the Perkins House property there is so important to remind young people of what America is and how we've struggled in the last 70 years to create it as it is. For those of you who have the responsibility of Frances Perkins' property in Maine, I don't want to see you again until you get rid of that governor in Maine. Don't come and talk to me about being Democrats or progressives or what we want to do when you have an insane person as governor of the state, because we are divided. We can't afford to be divided anymore. I don't say that just as a Democratic Party. I mean people, progressive Americans, people who believe in the four freedoms, people, Republicans and Democrats, who take great strength from the kind of country we've created in the last 70 to 80 years. Franklin Roosevelt once said that when you get to the end of your rope, hang on, tie a knot and hang on. That's where we are today. I mean, we take great encouragement from what happened in Virginia. I know we all do that. And it was an important victory. But an even greater victory was when women marched after Trump's inaugural and reminded them that there are forces in this country that are beyond the control of any government, and that's the people of the United States. And the people of the United States found heart and hope in that great march. So we're going to have a number of great marches, I'm afraid, in the years ahead. But we can't walk away from it as though it's not our responsibility. It is. If we want to save the Social Security system, we have to stand together. If we want to have immigration restored to its proper role in the American picture, we have to stand together. We have to stand up to the Republican, those who are opponents, and say, you can't do what you did to Obama. You can't be an opposition that opposes everything because we have a president who the country twice elected. We have to face racist America. We have to understand that an important, terrible part of our country's history is race relations. When you think of 300 years of what Black Americans have endured, from slavery to the cruel periods between the Civil War and between the Roosevelt administration, when you see what our responsibility is today, I heard Martin Luther King say once, I don't care, I do care, but what I'm pressing for is not for people to like me. I want to have the right under American law to be who I am. That's what everybody's entitled to that. Martin Luther King once said to me that in his work in Cicero, Illinois, he thought was the most dangerous task that he had ever undertaken. I mention that because racism isn't confined to Judge Moore in Alabama. Racism is a part of our country's history in a very deep and diabolic way. And we see the progress that's being made, but it's not being made anymore. We have to, again, get ready. We have to get ready. That's what we have to do. We have to prepare ourselves psychologically and otherwise for a long fight. For a long fight where we recognize what's at stake, where we're proud of what we've accomplished, where we're going to tell our children what it is and make them and help them and encourage them to go forward and carry the battle, carry the flag. And I would just say in closing a word to you. Harold was kind enough to mention the Four Freedoms Park, which I hope some of you or all of you have visited. Gina Polera, my colleague, is here today. She can answer any questions. But the Four Freedoms Park is something special. It's the memorial to Franklin Roosevelt in the context of what he represented. And what I think all of us, as the room upstairs it denotes, freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. That's what America's strength should be used to accomplish. So I think what I'm saying to you is at the end of a long and worrying day, and there's going to be many of them in the days ahead, take some time off and go over to the Four Freedoms Park and just sit there quietly. A lot of people tell me that you do this. Just sit there and let the spirit of this great country be breathed in once again. Let us all remember what it is that brought us together and causes us to stand together today. I wish you well in this discussion, but I thank you foremost for what you've already done and express my gratitude for what you're going to do. Thank you.
Once again, good morning. I'm Elizabeth Lubetkin-Lipton and a member of the Women's City Club and a sort of a member of the Francis Perkins Center. I've been there so often. First of all, Bill, the Women's City Club had a tour of the Four Freedoms Park. And are there many people here who went on that tour? Yeah, it was a special, special tour. And Sally came and helped us and showed us the whole thing. So thank you very much. And sir, thank you for your wonderful comments. It's truly a special honor to hear one speak who is so much firsthand knowledge about these women who we are honoring today. And I thank you for taking the time to be here. I'm not taking long to talk because we have a lot of things to do, but first, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Use the facilities if you like. They are on one flight up. Is that right, Harold? And it is now 5 to 10. Why don't we come back here by 5 after 10 and we're going to start. Thank you.